So this is one of the records that is going to be is part of this normative, this child sample that we're putting together. And so this is the responses. And as I said, we never get fewer than 17. We got 16 with the kids. Kids sometimes get fewer than 16 responses. And this was an RPAS administered record. Okay. So then let's look at the results here. And the reason I'm doing this is kind of showing you in what we do interpretively for kids, and so that this. So it's already selected for an 8-year-old output. Like I said, you can change from 8. If you want to look at an adult, you'd have to go back a couple screens to do that. Once you put in 8 years old, that you get these. And so here's where you could get the minimum and the maximum for the norms and all. So if you wanted to, so right now. You see the 0 for the M here, and the 2. These are the adult norms. Those things there that we talked about before. You can see where the cursor is, then that this here. You see this line here to there. That's the central tendency for kids, for 8-year-olds. So this score, although it's quite low for an adult, that this little line here is the 8-year-old sort of central tendency. And so it's just a little bit below the mean. Okay? So we keep the standard scores from adults, but we plot on the extra little piece. And now, what I was going to show you is just that thing I talked about before, just momentarily here. That you can get the minimum and the maximum in the norms too, and you change the profile. And I'll just show you what those are like if you wanted to see that. You see this grayed out area here, like that nobody got fewer than 0 cartridges is what that means. Nobody had more than 22 in a sample. Let's see if we have over here that the highest number of blends was like 17. That's what that is there. Can you see that over there? And so it's grayed out where you don't have anybody. The highest score in the non-patient sample for EII was 136. So if you're getting up 136, that's sort of like the highest that you get. And you can get score 3 is pretty bad, but you can get 3.5, 4, 5 there. The TP comp, the highest score was like in the non-patient sample was like 2.5, and this is adults. And this TP comp is designed so a 2 is generally equal to a 2 in the TPI. Got my initials right? The PTI. Although there's a little bit of shrinkage, a little bit of regression towards the mean. So a 2 on this is actually higher, and so on. And you can get scores below 0 also. Okay, which makes some sense because if you had everything just below the cutting line for all 5 and you ended up with 0s and you hand score it, so that the PT comp 0 is at the 90th percentile, so you can have scores less than 0. Okay, so there are very low scores in X minus and no cognitive codes. Okay, so if we let's get rid of that because that makes it, and let's get rid of the units so we can see this a little bit more clearly. Okay. So, and now we just have the 8-year-old norms here, okay? And that, So we don't have, why do we don't have complexity norms? We only have kids norms for the variables that we have all of the records for. We don't have all these kids records. This is derived from the literature, from the means and standard deviations in the literature. And that, so for example, although we don't have complexity, all these things down here are subcomponents of complexity. This person has no synthesis responses, and that's even low for an 8-year-old. Okay, that has very few. EA is only 2.0. That's quite low for an 8-year-old. It's below this. Here's that, and so this is in the lower range. So all the complexity scores are low. The F percentage is relatively high. So this is a simple record. And there's not a lot of cognitive processing going on. That may be there's not a lot of reflection, maybe not a lot of impulse control, a lot of checking and self-monitoring. And maybe the person has some cognitive limitations and simple thinking. And maybe that they're in their rush and they're incredibly bored, or they're not cooperating, they don't want to take a test. I mean, all those different kind of things. Okay. Now, one thing that you'll notice if you look at, well, we don't have, another weakness is that we don't have form quality scores here. And we're trying to develop them. I'm not sure if, but form quality is related to age. And that's very clear. The form quality is one of the strongest variables on the developmental index. Exner's data is the only data that I know where kids have the same form quality as adults. Everybody else that's published that kids have worse form quality than adults. So Ames, coming out of the developmental tradition out of Yale and so forth, and when she came out of that tradition years ago, where they, like when you go in the pediatrician's office, they have like one word at 2 or whatever, 20-word vocabulary at 3, and all the developmental stuff. She did that with kids from 3 to 18 in 3 different books. And she has, she and everybody else that's published kids stuff, I'm forgetting the other people that did that, and it's clear in the international data, it's clear in the control samples that I have, that form quality gets better with age. And so you can expect a 20 or an 18 to be the mean for adults. The mean's going to be around 30 or 32 or whatever for form quality minus. X minus percentage is the one that always bangs around my head. You can expect it to be 28, 30, 32 for kids. Okay? And it's maybe even the quality of those responses that makes more difference. So that what kids do is their forms are approximate. It's got like something that looks like an eye over here, and the whole thing becomes a face. Okay? It's got something that looks like a leg or a head, it becomes a bear. And so the forms are approximate. And so you can see the issues in sort of Piagetian development and conservation. They only look at one piece and they overgeneralize. And the language and the vocabulary is also sort of approximate, and they get the wrong word sometimes. Okay? They tend to be simpler, more general sorts of stuff, and more approximate, more estimates, like one association off in terms of the word that they come up with, and they end up being form quality minuses. And so those are the kind of form quality minuses that should contribute generally to bad scores in form quality. If they're like peculiar, gross little details, then that's not the kind of mistakes that we're generally talking about with the problems in development.
So then what does that do for special scores?
Special scores that you can expect with children to get level 1 special. So sometimes they'll score up as level 2. And with kids, that special scores are much more highly associated with the complexity of the record. Okay, so that in a 32 response record with a lot of developmental quality plus and synthesis and blend, you can expect with a kid to get more cognitive codes. When they try to pull out that complexity, they, based on fantasy and odd perceptions and overreactions and stuff, you see that those two are not, the number of responses and the complexity of the record is really not correlated very well with cognitive codes with adults. So that'd be the kind of the first thing. And you can see the kind of slips in language and DVs or DRs, in there. But be really careful about overscoring DRs and peculiar responses. I think that's well documented in this man. Dina?
When they see an eye and they hit a face, isn't that like the A-log or?
If they say something like, that's an eye, so it must be a face in the free association or the response phase, that would likely be an A-log or peculiar. Yeah, but it's an overly restrictive reasoning. Okay, it's rigid thinking. It's closed, and it's immature thinking. It's not immature in terms of fantasy driven. It's immature in terms of the specification of the logic, and it's related to cognitive deficiency in adults. In that, if you have those sorts of illogically restrictive or certitude peculiar responses or A-log, and I'm referring to how Jim Kleiger described it in his book on the thought disorder and Rorschach. Those are not the kind that really have to do with a positive thought disorder emerging in adolescents or adults. And that's one of the ways that things scores up the wrong way. And so you'll see in the way that we've written this up, it's kind of carried over from our Rorschach coding stuff. We tried to get people to be more conservative in coding, because you can code those kind of scores, and then you can code DRs where they're saying, that happened to me yesterday, gosh, I'd rather be doing that than taking these tests. Have you ever done that? Have you ever gone to a parade? Da, 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 da? That gets scored up as a DR or DR2. Those kind of things, like short asides, are not that problem. Who knows, who's making the rule you have to talk about the test and only the test. So those two types of codes get overcoded and jump up the cognitive codes, the severe cognitive codes, the level 2 cognitive codes, and the thought disorder indices, the PT-COM or PTI or ego impairment. So, and you see more of that with kids. So going back to this record, I guess it's page up, that that these are scored on an RPAS, and so that the form quality in WD minus is 6%. That's even good for an adult. Okay, so that even if this thinking is very, very simple, it's really pretty accurate for a kid, and that's pretty good. Okay, and so we want to get a better idea of why the thinking is so simple. That it's more likely if it's immature, approximate, rigid, cognitively impaired thinking with a kid, you'd probably get more form quality minus there. It's going to interfere with adaptation. So that although we don't have the norms for form quality for kids, that kids' form quality is worse than adults, and you can kind of take that into consideration. I'm not sure. I kind of forget. If we go to change the code sequence, so the underlying scores are still there, right, and you can change all the norms that you're using, and you can change the symbols that come out. So now that this record is going to be stored as CS, which is a problem for me for the research, because this is our norm, our past norms, I got to remember to go back and fix it. Right. I got usually would have a TA or somebody to help me because they can't do anything. But
so like once we send it in, then we just constantly we can access the website and do what we wish.
Yeah, and so you can look at. You could change, like right now, the 4 form qualities that you extrapolated on weren't sure of, and change those in the scores and see what the output looks like.
So there's no interpretive report?
No, that we're working on an interpretive report, and like everything else, we can't get to it that well. And so basically what it's going to do is those interpretive tables that you have, it's going to basically be like a listing lookup program. It's just going to go pull those interpretations out, and they're going to be a little bit firmed up and a little formatted, a little bit more consistency. The way they're written now is sort of like each one there's like a different style and a different angle. So we're trying to clean those up a little bit. We've already established our benchmarks in terms of high and low, and we're trying to figure out how to do it. So it's really going to be a time saver and not an interpretive output. In some ways, a little bit more like these MMPI programs, not, who's the guy in Orange County? Not like a Caldwell really fine report. It's going to be more like the other MMPI reports that just Bruce put out those statements. Ours is going to be a list. It's going to help you look up so you don't have to look them up in the book. And then hopefully we'll go from there. So now we change that. What I want to see here is whether the results, whether it has, so I've never used CS tables. Oh, you see that now when you put in the CS, let's pretend this was CS record, that now we have the form quality scores. So if you want to get form quality norm transformations, you can use the CS tables with our system. You know, until you're more confident with the norms, you get more information. So let's hope that they work out in the right direction. So that a 6, that the mean for kids is way up here for form quality minus. So an 8-year-old gets what would be 120 for an adult. That's about a mean of like 35 or whatever, like I was saying. 8-year-olds have a mean about 35, an X minus, and that's way up there. So this 9, which is artificial, this 9 would be an 18 in the CS, but it's way lower, so that it's much more accurate and precise. So part of form quality is precision also. Okay, the precision of the cognitive operations that go into specifying an accurate thing that matches the block, and picking the right word and matching it well. So being able to communicate that. So if you use the CS norms, then you get much better data there. Okay, so that's just our optimized administration. Our optimized administration is much better with kids, even if you use the comprehensive system, because with kids, too often you get 14 to 17 and they're all formed, and you don't get much information. So even if you use the CS, I'd use our optimized administration. But if you use our optimized administration, our symbols and terminology, you could use the CS tables and get that be more precise. So if you wanted to, and I'd be glad when people run through this to talk about the technique or whatever with it. So you can see that kids give a little bit more cognitive codes. Their means are a little bit higher here. That you see where the arrow is there on form quality minus, and there's like these little whisker things or whatever they are, or with a little, it's got a gap there with those. That means that the data did not congeal that well across samples, and we stretched out the expectation. So remember I said that the samples were not that consistent with kids, and they're problematic. In those variables, it was more problematic than the other variables. And there's some problems, because there were some differences between how the Japanese scored everything with minus that wasn't in the book, and that's a problem. That's a little bit more why that was. And we didn't correct for that. So had the norms been more consistent across the samples, we would have done the same thing. So right now, we've got about 40 RPAS records for kids from the U.S. We've got another 80 coming in on a dissertation. We've got about a bunch of CS records are coming in, and we're doing our optimized modeling with those. We have stuff from Australia, I made that up, Brazil and Italy coming in on RPAS administration. The Italian stuff is CS administration. Brazilian stuff is our optimized administration. And so we're going to put those samples together and try to improve on this a little bit. This kid has no DD responses. You see that kids give more DD responses, which is a little inconsistent with some of the stuff I said before. And he's below the sort of expected range for kids. That basically means he's sticking with the W's and the holes and what's obvious conventional, and the kid can recognize that pretty well. So he's not, for form quality and for DD response, he's not peculiar, sort of conventional. I don't know if it's a guy or a girl, I have no idea. And so that would be part of the interpretation there. He has no critical content. No blood and guts, no fire, no explosion, no morbid, no aggression. So, and these things, the kid looks pretty healthy. And there's not a lot of mayhem and morbid stuff and aggressive stuff or sexualized stuff going on in a person's mind. So you see that a 0% corresponds to the second percentile. So basically, for the adults, only 4% of the people gave no critical contents, and the mid-range of that is 2%. So it's second percentile is the middle of the range, and that's how we did those things. So it's very, very unusual to have no critical content. Let's see if we come up here and we ask the question about, I can't get the units here. Why can't you get the units? I don't know why. It seems weird to me. Which critical content is that? Well, I was thinking that maybe in a non-patient adult sample that everybody gave at least one critical content. That's not true. If you look at this minimum maximum stuff, the minimum for critical contents was 0, and the maximum is not even on there. So somebody gave some outlandish number of critical content.